Okay, everything works, everything works. Okay. What I want to do is... let's see. Critical nodes, 1 out of 7, shape defense, everything. Let's rank. See. Go. Start demo. Okay, so those are the two combos.
Wildfire! Fortify summons!
Apparently he has only one finish.
Breaking through! I'm here. Three mountains shift! Your behavior won't be tolerated! Ceaseless strikes! Mountains fall, earth shatters!
I forgot how to enter the stance pretty quickly.
Get back! Sick!
I'm so used to her new combos so that I...
Weak spot! Sweep it onto me! Get lost! Take this! Yep! Shatter! Standing by. Good riddance. Get lost! Take this. Copy that. Time to get lost. Danger! service. Better dodge.
I'm here. Time to eat.
Standing by. Warning.
My turn now.
Shark Nami!
It doesn't even restore the charges.
Sweep it all clean.
Blow, blow, blow away your troubles. Yeah.
Don't mess up my nails. Phew. Weak spot. Take this.
She doesn't feel all that well. That good.
That's grams per centimeter cubed, but we'll just call it for our purposes a 7.8 or 7.8 times the density of water. Water, which is what an onion is mostly made out of, for example, as a visual representation here. These two small tungsten rods are 606 grams, 1.33 pounds, while this much larger onion is 235 grams, or about half of a pound, because it's less dense. On this scale, where steel is a 7.8, an onion is about 1.1, aluminum, known to be less weight than steel, is just 2.7, and brass, which many people notice is heavier than steel when picking it up, is 8.5 compared to 7.8. Tungsten carbide, which some people might use as weights for their density, is 15 to 16 in density. This isn't tungsten carbide though, this is raw tungsten, which we chose because this, my friends, is a full 19.3, so it's heavier or denser, I guess, than any gold jewelry even equivalent of its size. I mean, if this is 125 grams, it would take 30 of my kids' toy cars to equal these. Okay, I think you get it. They weigh a lot while not taking up a lot of space, which is just what we need. But yeah, can't make a full hammer out of this stuff, as it would just become a bomb and blow apart. And because you basically sinter this stuff, which is hundreds of tons of pressure on powdered tungsten that liquefies it into shape, and no one has an impact wrench sintering mold that I know of. So time to make some slugs of this stuff and shove them into this hammer to bump up its mass for the same size to fit into the same tool. If you've never drilled into an impact hammer before, especially on cordless for how they work, well, that would be basically all of you I'm talking to here, because drilling into this is not super possible, even with a cobalt drill bit and a lot of pressure from the drill press. It's barely even leaving a kiss mark here. So we employed the professional help of Hill Precision Tool in Mills River, North Carolina, who specializes in machining into uber hard materials to do some carbide on carbide crime and mill into this hammer in order to accept our own carbide alterations or additions. If you've never taken apart a spring clutch hammer assembly, it's not always a walk in the park. In fact, some of these just don't come apart once assembled.
Tighten the vise more, please.
More?
Yeah, more.
People talk to us often about wanting a thicker washer in the base of these to increase that spring tension, but these are all so close in tolerance to fit these retaining ball bearings in that you'll not always be able to get them back out when pushing this assembly back together to scoop it out. If this fully compressed spring was any thicker from shimming, you definitely wouldn't get one out. All right, with this hammer off of the hammer assembly to send it off, let's get to making this impact looking the part. You see, this hammer alone is about to become worth several, like a handful of these M18 high torques once it's finished, like the investment in it. And then it's gonna be all buttoned up inside of this stock looking Milwaukee. So while its internals are at the spa, let's give this tungsten hammer tool a makeover with a more tungsten-like finish by turning the tool black. This started by taking this home for use of the stove I'll be needing, and of course some free labor. It's a generational thing, gotta get your labor out of them while it's free. Plus he just loves washing tools. Next step is to add hot water, and then RIT dye, which is used on a lot of materials, often textiles, clothing. It works on plastics, not all of them, but nylon like this one, it does, requires 140 degrees Fahrenheit to get it there. So if you're not doing this while on the burner, starting with like 170, 180 degrees or so water, that will cool from the dye and the stainless base in here, probably a good idea. Also including the tail cap and cooling blades in this one, because I've seen these black builds put together and the backside is still red, and that sticks out sort of like a baboon by the looks of it, a bit odd. You could use 2 bottles of RIT dye to make sure that in an hour she's going to be done, or in my case had to add some more boiling water and then later reheat this black mixture once in a pot for it really to take with 1 bottle. And here we have 1 side quest complete. If you leave them in long enough, should look black as night, like flipping the dark mode switch on your red tools. If Batman had cordless tools in his Batcave, they would look like this. And even its cooling fins are not poking out as red here. I think it's pretty neat and more of a befitting home for the new hammer assembly. So let's check in on that at Hill Precision Tool in North Carolina. News is it's even a bit harder than we measured it as. The big boy Rockwell machine here shows it at 61 plus HRC. We're basically trying to burrow into solid mass that has the characteristics of a hardened Japanese chef knife. It's not easy stuff, but is possible though with the further wonders of high RPM tungsten carbide, which makes for quite the high-pitched display for your ears and a molten spalling of material desperately being evacuated out of those machined holes. Today's video is brought to you by the letter W, which is for tungsten on the periodic table of elements. Why it's a W comes from the word in Germanic speaking countries Wolfram, even though it's actually a Swedish word which means heavy stone, I guess, which about sums up things for us today. It's hard as a stone and we're using it because it's heavy. Nothing all too sciencey about that. Shout out to Hill Precision Tool. I mean, we employed them to do this, but it's a lot to take on with confidence and be like, yeah, we can do that. And we're gonna chalk this full of, well, holes as much as we can without interfering with the front hammering surface and the spring to try to keep all this in mostly one piece while in use and not yard sale the whole thing inside of the tool. As the outer diameter of these hammers are basically just weight, mass to lend to the hammer that's doing the impacting. Outside of like impact drivers, these hammers don't need to be this physical size, and weight is something we can improve on, not wasting an inch on this pretty, excuse my language, but badass looking hammer now that it's had nearly 40 holes burrowed into it to accept our tungsten slugs. we needed to order more tungsten than this, as cutting these, even with a 14-inch abrasive saw, it would take about 15 minutes to make one cut. And the whole assembly, glowing from that heat, we'd go through a full blade in about 2-3 cuts. Do not recommend. So here we have what we need, around 40 slugs of raw tungsten, all beautiful and ready to become dumb weight, I suppose. To do this, our plan was always going to be green Loctite, bearing retaining glue compound. Hill Precision was nice enough to machine these within a whisper of going through the backside, so we could get the entire inside diameter and back face of the hole to dry and cure that adhesive bond and keep these chunky boys nestled in tight. ChatGPT said based on its calculations, RPM, joules, mass of this thing, it should hold in place, but I mean, I've seen some high speed of these things working and I have my doubts. Time for the weigh-in. The OEM stock hammer assembly, the whole thing altogether weighs 2 pounds 4 ounces, which is not a whole lot these days, but does get the job done for sure. Our new tungsten impregnated full assembly weighs in at 2 pounds 11. 11.4 ounces, which is about a half pound of added weight to this same footprint, which isn't a whole lot by itself, sure, but as a percentage of the entire assembly, an over 20% increase, and that's for this whole stack. It's almost 2.5 times that percentage increase for the hammer itself being flung around as a difference. We've come all this way, maintaining a size constraint to essentially just increase weight, of course. So let's, now that it's cured and dry, find out if we've done anything at all, basically. Here it is, the TTC-THT, Torque Test Channel Tungsten 1/2-inch high torque, up against its stock form self. $905. That's pretty good, believe it or not, as we have to expected this to make less if it didn't come apart, with this bog standard battery, the XC 5.0, having to spin up a much higher mass. You see, this tool is rated differently with an XC 5.0 than it is with a 6 amp hour forge, which means even out of the box, their own tool, that motor would prefer to have more juice to get that hammer spinning just right. So we're already on the right track for when we need to do just that, and that's this, the 6 amp hour forge. Let's see it. $981, up from $891 with the standard pack, or $920 if we're talking about the same battery here. I'm liking this. It's definitely trending in the right direction. If the stock hammer assembly was needing more juice to spin up in the form of a 6 amp hour pack, we imagine, or we're hoping, that the new tungsten hammer studs through its neck type Frankenstein creation wants things to be taken even further to hit its sweet spot. Here's the 8 amp hour forge pack that uses spicy tabless cells inside. $1,071. Now we're talking. Let's be real, you guys are watching a fully finished, put together video here, so I mean, you have a rather good chance that you're going to be seeing some stuff probably work. That's definitely not the case going into these for us. It's not a given that our harebrained ideas like this do anything. The tungsten slugs could just fly out after 1 second of impacting, or just not do much of anything. Sometimes we buy a bunch of stuff and build something and it does a whole lot of nothing, and that goes into a big folder of mistakes. So yeah, gains like this are encouraging to see, pretty cool for me. All right, 12 amp hour forge is last up. It's the only place to go from here. This tool has been getting rather hot from this exercise, hotter than usual during this whole process. I think spinning up this much more weight than it expects to have is probably rather taxing as a request. And initially, this isn't going to hit hardly any extra over the 8 amp hour, which I mean, that just sounds unacceptable to me. So the trick was to, and this is hard for a kid in a candy store situation, just gonna give it a 45-minute break to cool down, at which point it was much more room temperature again, and this is what she's got on tap at full beans.
That's what I'm talking about. Heck yeah.
1,122. Yeah, pretty stoked on that because that is the highest a half-inch has made from anything retail. Like coming out of anything you can sort of buy half-inch high torque the world over. That's a new channel record for us. You love to see it. It might not seem like a lot over the stock form for you, just looking at this with a 12 amp hour forge at around 1,000, but numbers north of 1,000 are pretty hard fought for and difficult to come by. It also has to sort of make up for lost ground in these runs as well. I'm sure you could tell across the tests you've been seeing the tungsten TTC impact is lower RPM and lower IPM, that's impacts per minute, on any of the batteries as a result of some now more front heavy action going up front. So aside from early decent gains from initial heavier hits, it falls behind a bit and has to make that up and pass up the stock tool, which is able to do at the top. Once a bolt or nut is uber tight or stuck, each hit being much heavier and harder will get you further than hitting it more often now, and that's where we see gains, as you might expect from a physics standpoint. That's pretty cool to see it all come together like that. Let's check in on this tungsten honeycomb of a hammer. And yeah, they're all starting to come out. All of them basically starting to wiggle free from impacting and vibration. Funny enough, this only helps having the weight further from the center when we're talking the physics of these things. But we decided to instead, with the end appearing to be near, as we can't weld tungsten in place, and trying to peen them over on this rock hard material is out of the question. Let's shoot this in high speed just because it's cool, all exposed out in the open air. And this yard sailed instantly. It was on its way out for sure, barely was able to press the record button before this started flinging tungsten slugs around the shop. So only got the tail end of it here. Admittedly, probably would have got some more cool footage if I was pushing this whole impact forward with a lot more force to keep it on the hammer assembly seated against the anvil and dogs, but without the hammer cover up front to keep this all pushed together, it is an interesting rodeo to ride. These are the parts that have been located so far. The hammer cover may have been doing double duty here, and that inside wall stopping the tungsten slugs from poking out even further and flying off, but it'd eventually be a battle of weight improvement versus friction, with enough of those scraping up on the inside wall. Altogether, this thing's a hoot. Awesome machined components and some pretty sweet gains too. So was it worth it? Absolutely not. No way. Way too complex, way too expensive to pull this off. I think even if a brand were to do this on the manufacturing end with the hurdles and design it would require and the raw cost of tungsten, it's just not feasible, which makes this example that we've since put back together with all of its tungsten goodness again into its hammer even cooler that it exists. It's likely there will never be another one of these made because of all of those things, and I just love this little abomination even more for it. Into the history books of ridiculous impacts it goes. A tungsten hammer For impact to be enjoyed here in this video and likely nowhere else forever, unless someone is somehow even more mentally challenged than us. Really enjoy working on projects like this. Click below to join us for even more of those sorts.
Aerocrete is amazing, but making it usually requires an expensive foam machine, an air compressor, cement mixer, and meticulous trial and error to learn how to use everything correctly. But it
Yeah. Torque test channel. And that's from 21st of November 2020. Mm-hmm. I want to right now. Let's go like this. Why are they all wearing shorts? Am I talking to a cat? Or what? Look. Pinky. So cute. Spinner alerts. Alright, time to switch.
So I was recently working on my mill and I realized something. I don't actually know how fast it's spinning. Now, in light of this revelation, you might be objecting that it has an RPM display very prominently on the head, right under the googly eyes, and this is true. But what you need to realize is that's just a cardboard disc that spins as you adjust the CVT, and the only thing clocking it at a specific angle is that acorn nut in the middle. I know because I had to disassemble the entire head a few years back when a screw worked out and locked the brake on. And then I did it again just a few weeks ago, as I was tracking down why it had started to jump out of low gear so easily. Tip: at least on mine, the high neutral low shift lever is attached to a smooth shaft with just a clamp. No keyway or spline or even a set screw and dimple. Turns out that can slowly slip over time, meaning that I had been shifting less and less fully into low over the years without realizing it, hence the growing tendency to jump out of gear in its rather alarming way. So, boo cheap design, but also yay easy fix. Anyway, after each time it was disassembled, I had reset the RPM disc by dialing the CVT down as low as it would go, then setting the disc to its lowest setting, assuming those matched. And frankly, that was more than good enough for the non-production, non-optimized, decidedly non-professional machining that I do. I can get by without an RPM reading at all and just work by ear. But still, the thought that it could be wrong started to bug me. I needed a way to directly measure the rotational speed, obviously.
Yeah.
I needed a tachometer. But asking that prompts another question, which opens a rabbit hole leading to the very existence of this video. What kind of tachometer? Because there are multiple, completely distinct technologies for measuring RPMs. I couldn't decide between them, so I just got one of each. And since it's still, definitely not putting in effort yet December, I thought we could take a quick look. This is a basic, dirt cheap digital tachometer. Aim the laser at the thing you're measuring and it'll look for changes in reflection. It assumes it will see one high to low or low to high transition per rotation. If the part happens to be half black and half white, that might work on its own. But just adding a stripe with Sharpie on raw metal didn't work for me. Luckily, it comes with a couple strips of retroreflective tape, which pretty much guarantee a good reading once applied. And it works great. 1620 RPMs according to it, compared to the 1400 I dialed in on the CVT. And on the lathe it's reading about 410, while the gearbox claims it should be 460. Interesting. This style of tachometer is simple, cheap, fast, and doesn't have much of a learning curve. So it's definitely the correct choice for what I need. I just can't help but think it's a little bit boring. So let's look at another kind of electronic tachometer. Flashing light warning. This is a stroboscopic tachometer. Not exactly expensive, but not dirt cheap like the optical one. This doesn't have any sensors on it, just this array of LEDs which can flash at different frequencies. You measure the rotation by manually adjusting how fast it is strobing. Shined onto something spinning, you can dial this in until it appears to stay still, like a wagon wheel in a western, rotating a full 360 between each flash. It made for some fun glitch effects in the progressive scan of my camera, but if you just focus on the part itself, the video I was able to capture is a decent representation of what using this looks like in person. On the mill it reads 1620 as well, which is giving me a lot of confidence in that reading. And with it, I could even measure the pedestal grinder, matching the nominal RPMs of the motor quite nicely. Measuring this would have been a challenge for the first device. I don't think you're going to get tape to stick to either the polisher or the wire wheel, so you'd have to remove some of the fairing to be able to see the shaft itself. The stroboscope is much more convenient. I like that this model comes with a phasing button, which slightly speeds or slows the strobe while it is being held, so you can rotate which face of the spinning part is caught in the flash. One use of these is to be able to inspect spinning parts without turning them off, so that's really useful. Since you're in charge of the strobe rate, remember that things will also stand still if the strobe frequency is 2, 3, or any other integer multiple of the rotational rate. So you've got to be careful to make sure you find the lowest frequency which works. This is a basic limitation of the technology, really a statement of a brute fact about the universe we live in, not, as this reviewer on Amazon seemed to think, some kind of fault with the product design. And if the thing spinning is radially symmetrical, then you have to be careful you're not catching it having only spun 120 degrees or whatever. Few things in this world are truly perfectly radially symmetrical, but you can always add a sticker or a Sharpie mark or something to break the symmetry if you're unsure. It's a bit hard to see in this video, but the Sharpie mark was plainly visible on just this blade and not the others when I phased them around. Plus, bonus, it's a rave gun. Anyway, this is a mechanical tachometer from somewhere in the middle of the last century. Rotating its input shaft causes weights inside the device to move outward through centrifugal force, like on the governor of an old steam engine. The faster it spins, the higher they lift, and the more the needle moves. There are some other mechanical tach designs which use a kind of spring-loaded friction clutch or magnetic eddy currents, but I don't think this is one of them, and it's far too nice to crack open without a really good reason. You operate it by holding it in line with the shaft whose rotation you're trying to measure, and using one of these rubberized attachments to couple the rotation. You have to set the expected range, and the manuals all run of dire outcomes if you have it set lower than the actual speed. So, if in doubt, set it to higher to begin with and work down. For the same setting on the mill, it reads about 1540, 80 lower than the other methods. And I would definitely trust the others over this. I have no clue when it was last calibrated. I'd always seen them come with a wheel attachment like this and never understood why. Holding this up against the side of a rotating shaft will create a gearing ratio, and the amount the tachometer shaft spins would depend on the diameter of the shaft being measured. So how could this be useful for measuring RPMs? In short, it isn't. This is for using the same device to measure the linear speed of the surface of a rotating part. In this case, the wheel has a 6-inch circumference. So if you divide the value shown on the gauge by 2, you'll get the surface speed in feet per minute. Testing it on the 1/2 inch bar on the lathe, it reads about 102, so about 56 surface feet per minute. We know it's spinning at 410 RPM, according to the digital tach. So that's pi over 2 inches per revolution, or 0.13 feet, at 410 revolutions per minute, gives us 53.6 surface feet per minute. Not bad, and definitely good enough as a starting point for setting up machining operations on a lathe. The physics of a cutting tool don't really care about RPMs per se, only about the speed that material is coming at them. That means that larger diameters will need lower RPMs in order to maintain the same tangential surface speed. This is particularly obvious when looking at a facing operation on the lathe. Because the radius of the cut is constantly changing, the surface finish will be different across the face as the cutter moves in and out of its sweet spot. This can be fixed if you keep changing the speed of the lathe as the cutter moves in. Tricky to do on an acoustic lathe, but it's completely standard on modern CNC lathes, and you can hear the motor hum get higher and higher in pitch as the cutter approaches the center. Measuring rotational speed in 3 completely different ways is pretty good, particularly since I only ever really needed one, if even that many. But there was a 4th tachometer modality I really wanted to explore, and Really, it was the reason I got on this kick to begin with. Let's talk about vibes.
Bring it.
See, if you're measuring RPMs, that implies something is spinning.
Light it up.
And unless that thing is absolutely perfectly balanced, it's going to vibrate at least a bit as it spins, and maybe a whole lot. And vibrations can be measured. We just have to multiply the frequency of the vibration by 60 to turn those cycles per second into the revolutions per minute we're looking for. We could probably do this with an accelerometer, but until fairly recently, those were ridiculously expensive. Plus, we already decided that digital is boring, so let's keep it analog. Instead, what if we had a wire of the correct length so that it would resonate with the vibration frequency that we're interested in? Then if we start to see it whip back and forth, we know that the RPMs are generating that frequency of vibrations. And if we could move the wire in and out, we could tune it on the fly to detect whatever frequency we're interested in. I present to you the Vibratac slide rule tachometer and the Tracit cerometer, two different implementations of that very idea. On the Vibratac, you slide the wire in and out linearly, while on the Tracit, you rotate a spool which feeds it in and out. The Tracit is still being manufactured. I got this one new off Amazon. I think the Vibratacs might also still being made, but their website doesn't exactly invite confidence. And the listed price hasn't changed since 2017, so draw your own conclusions. Both of these take some getting used to. With the stiffer wire of the Vibratac, I failed to get a reading at all when used on electric devices around the shop. Even the grinder couldn't get a result. But the marketing material all talks about internal combustion engines, which certainly do tend to vibrate a lot more. That's one of the nasty things about them. So I tried it on the old lawnmower at the shop, and it immediately worked. The Tracit cerometer was a bit easier to get working, though it was still a bust on the smoother running mill. Don't ask me what the Cero prefix means, though. I failed to find an explanation, only getting some wild-ass guesses by the Google AI. So I summoned all my introvert courage and did a basic journalism. I emailed the company and asked. Turns out, they don't know it either. It was already called that when the owner's great-grandfather bought the patent, and the explanation has been lost to history. So that's both frustrating and kind of amazing. Anyway, the thinner wire on the cerometer made it responsive to lower levels of vibration, and I was able to get a faint but definite reading on the pedestal grinder, which matches both the stroboscope reading and the 1800 RPM claimed on the motor nameplate nicely. But with both of these, it was always going to be a fairly slow, finicky process. You have to adjust the length, pause a second or two to see if it's resonating, at least on electric motors, and keep repeating until something happens or you give up. It's neat that these devices are so portable. And they're analog but almost solid state and barely having any moving parts to break. That's really cool. But it would be nice to have a whole bunch of them next to each other set to different lengths, so that at a quick glance you could see the results for a whole bunch of resonance bands. Friends, I present to you exactly that, a Fram resonant reed tachometer. 60 tuned rods called reeds in 200 Hz increments. These came in a variety of sizes and frequency ranges. Some are designed to be handheld, while others like this one were meant to be mounted more permanently. These aren't too hard to find, but I had been hoping to find one with a low enough frequency range that I could mount it on the lathe. This one only goes down to 1000 RPMs, which is higher than almost anything I do on the lathe, and only covers some of the high range on the mill. But now that I actually have one to play with, this makes total sense. If I move it around or just tap it, look at how much the low frequency reeds get excited. I can only imagine how useless they would get at even lower frequencies. Just a massive noise from every stray vibration in your environment. But that said, I'm pretty impressed with how precise it can be. I can tune the CVT on the mill to lie between two reeds and see almost no excitation of either of them, which might limit its usefulness a bit, since you can't always adjust the speed of the thing being measured. So if it happens to fall between two reeds, you might not be able to measure it at all. But it's still a supremely pleasing little device. Analog, yet truly solid state, and yet also digital, at least in the sense of being quantized. I also found this interesting little oddity when poking around the listings, literally mint in box from 1952. It's another resonant reed device, but in this case it measures the frequency of mains electricity, with two sets of reeds centered on 50 and 60 Hz. At first I assumed there would be a little synchronous motor or solenoid in there to generate the vibrations, but looking at the patent, it actually excites the reeds directly using a magnetic field generated by the AC current. And it totally works, with a very fast response to both turning on and off the current. Here it is again in slow-mo. It's such a lovely thing. Maybe I'll build a little mounting box for it. So that's a quick tour of the world of tachometers. I'm really glad I had this excuse to play with them all, but truthfully, for what little tachometer needs I really have, I'll probably just use the stroboscope. It feels nice in the hand, you don't need direct physical contact or need to put a retroreflective sticker anywhere, and it's nice to have control over the entire process. Plus, you know, rave gun. The next video really, truly should be that stained glass globe project I've been working on for like a year now. I've been making actual progress on it the last few weeks, and it's looking good. Look for that video by the end of the year, hopefully. And until then, cheers.
If you ever...
Looks like that's everything. That's going to be it for this stream. Good luck, fun, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. No, wait.
Yeah.
Completely forgot about something. Let's not forget to record it also.
The word low-genuinely has low-genuinely become inescapable online, as the creation of this unholy abomination of slang has the internet in a vice grip. It would appear Bunny Boy Josh is responsible for releasing it upon the world on the 22nd of November, combining low-key and genuinely into a horrific new piece of slang. Since then, we've seen the word evolve into many more phrases, with pieces such as low-Kirk ontological low state combining references to Charlie Kirk, ontology, and flow state. It might seem bizarre at first glance, however, this type of messing about with language is what meme culture excels at. The academic article, The Influence of Internet Memes on English Vocabulary and Grammar, explores this idea, with the author noting how language can be changed by digital spaces, writing, "Memes act as a crucible for linguistic innovation, where the playful and often subversive manipulation of language rules leads to the creation of new vocabulary and grammatical structures." Of course, low-genuinely is only meant to be a joke, although it is still a demonstration of the influence of internet memes on English vocabulary and grammar. After all, the proliferation of slang is a traditional meme in itself, and digital slang often will manifest in the real world. The word slop is another good example of this, having just been named Word of the Year by Merriam-Webster, although it's unclear if low-genuinely has as much staying power. Plus, it wasn't long ago that low-key was considered Gen Z slang and undecipherable by the rest of the world, whilst now it's just ordinary slang that needs to be smooshed into other words in order to keep its novelty. Despite worries that this might mean the internet is cooked and the death of intellectualism is well and truly here, it could be argued the fact that words such as low-genuinely exist is a beneficial exercise, as people have to well and truly understand the English language in order to play with it in such a way. The digital ecosystem is the perfect environment for small phrases and portmanteaus to evolve in this manner, as it's the fun of taking something so normal and pushing it to become something other that keeps ensuring low-genuinely survives. Plus, most are aware of the fact that it sounds entirely ridiculous, which is why you'll see it applied to a slang bomb designed to completely flashbang the viewer's senses, a technique that the internet has seen applied many times before. In short, low-genuinely may be a new way to say low-key and genuinely in an intentionally ridiculous manner, satirizing the goofy slang one might find on the internet. However, it also demonstrates the way language can genuinely evolve as a result of people messing about online, and if low-genuinely has legs, it might just star on the Merriam-Webster dictionary too. What meme would you guys like me to give a lesson in next? Let me know in the comments below.
Subscribe!
Warner Brothers is not for sale. No, wait. It is for sale and Netflix is buying it. No, wait, actually it's Paramount, the Saudis, Larry Ellison, and Jared Kushner who are doing a hostile takeover over the Cartoon Network and CNN. Yes, this is all very confusing and ripe for corruption. After a heated rivalry between Netflix and Paramount for Warner Brothers, a company that has already changed hands a bunch of times over the past 25 years, it appears as though Netflix was victorious. But now Paramount has swept in with a hostile bid that has threatened to topple the whole deal. And I guess sprinkle in some crony capitalism while you're at it. It's hard to know who to root for in this saga. On the one side is Netflix, the streaming behemoth whose bid to buy a portion of Warner Brothers would be, as Senator Elizabeth Warren declared, an anti-monopoly nightmare. Trade groups have argued that Netflix's acquisition of Warner Brothers could trigger potential job losses, higher subscription prices, and fewer streaming options for consumers, and potentially catastrophic changes for the movie theaters. On the other side is Paramount, whose bid raises most of the same competition-related concerns and is backed by Trump buddy Larry Ellison, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, and Trump's son-in-law Jared Kushner. Critics are worried that Kushner's involvement might give...
Alright. Now let's go into it. Block of Contact Solution, and I'll